Thanks for listening to the Healthy Church Podcast with Larry Barker and Drew Klein.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Healthy Church Podcast. Drew Klein here with Larry Barker, fresh back from vacation to Alaska. So I'm ready to hear about the grizzly bear fight and the whales, all the things. So yeah.
Well, I tell you that when I let that grizzly bear go, he knew he had picked on the wrong tourist.
Yeah, I can tell. Yep. Mm-hmm.
No, we had friends that saw bears. We didn't see bears, but that could be good and bad. But anyway, no, we had an awesome trip, great getaway. Something Shelby and I have been wanting to do for a long time, and kind of celebrate it. Our anniversary isn't till June, and I know I look too young to be married 45 years. I know that's true, and
yes.
amens are ringing as people listen to this podcast all across America, right, Drew?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I have this make-believe world I like to escape into occasionally.
Well, I'm glad it was a good trip. I know that I've heard wonderful. That's the one state in the union that I've not been to. So I'm looking forward to that trip at some point.
Well, that's interesting, Drew, because I can now say I've been in all 50. That was my state also. And Shelby's only got 2 or 3 others that she hasn't been into. And which it's interesting to me. What in the world were you doing in North Dakota? How in the world did you ever go to North Dakota? That's not a state people go, you know what? I think I want to go to North Dakota.
Yep. No, I remember being in North Dakota and it being -9 degrees. And so that was memorable. Yeah.
Well, let me give you a little family history. My dad was in the military. We were stationed at Clark Air Base in the Philippines from 1966 to 1968. And in January, they moved our family to Minot, North Dakota.
Oh, my goodness.
For 2 years, I had not worn a coat. I'll never forget, I got a brother 6 years older than me. You know what my brother Steve said? He looked at Dad, he goes, okay, who'd you make mad?
Exactly. Sent you to Siberia.
Oh, man. I know about that -9, buddy. I can talk about it. But, glad to have been there. Glad to have seen what we saw. I highly recommend it. The whale watching was phenomenal. The history there, the towns. We just really enjoyed the visit.
Awesome. Well, what's on your heart this morning for what we want to talk about on the podcast?
Well, we've been talking a lot, of course, about discipleship, and then that leads into leadership development. And kind of where I'm wanting to go the next couple is making us understand how they're tied together. They should be. Matter of fact, if you have a leadership development problem, actually your problem's probably you don't have a discipleship pathway. Because a leadership development is going to come out of the discipleship pathway. You know, discipleship, and I love what, I'm trying to remember who I got the quote from. Maybe it'll come to me later. But been doing a lot of reading on leadership development, stuff by different people. But discipleship is about your character. Leadership is about your influence. You disciple someone so that they will develop their character and their intimacy with Christ. But it doesn't stop there. Okay, well, when I reach that, of course, we know we're always going to have to be working on us, leading ourselves. And let me say something. The first person you need to lead is you. You are responsible for leading you. Right. I can talk to Drew and I can try to help Drew, but Drew is going to have to make the decision to follow through on that. You know, that's kind of Philippians 2 where it talks about he's working in us, but the verse after it talks about us doing the work. We have responsibilities. Sure. A part of my 5% that we've talked about before that nobody else can do for me is my walk with Christ. Nobody else can do my quiet time, my Bible reading, my prayer time, my intimacy of walking into his presence. So I just love that. Discipleship's intimacy, leadership is influence. So leadership development says, okay, I see the godly character in these individuals. Now, how can I add the competencies that they need, the skill sets, the abilities that will help them? Matter of fact, Drew, a lot of it, I heard this statistic, and I think it was JD Greear on his podcast I was listening to, and it said 75% of discipleship is watching somebody live the life. In other words, we think it's a class, and it's not.
Right.
It's more life on life, and we know that. Matter of fact, he made a comment. He said his dad they were going to the funeral of the pastor his dad grew up under, and he said, son, he was a wonderful preacher, but I can't give you one sermon right now that he preached. But I can tell you about how I saw him pray and how I saw him love and how I saw him. And he's not saying those sermons weren't important.
Right, sure.
It's just 25% of discipleship maybe is the curriculum, but 75% of it is doing life with someone. And so that's what we're talking about. How do we watch and see that character and see their excitement? They're growing in the Lord. Okay, how can I give them the skill sets they need? And I'm thankful for the first staff position I had. I remember the pastor telling me, he said, hey, let's start doing some things together. I said, okay, like what? Why don't you go with me on the hospital visits? And I was like, what? I was like, okay. I mean, I wasn't against it, but I said, well, what do I have to do? I mean, I'm 19 years old. How do I make a hospital visit of somebody I don't even know? He goes, you don't have to do things, just watch.
Yeah.
And you know what? I watched a pastor care for his sheep. I watched him shepherd. I watched how he entered a room and when he left a room. I watched how he was sensitive to the situation. And that was such a great learning experience. And that's what we're talking about. Leadership development will come far more out of that and I'll get to a couple of things here in a minute, so I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But sometimes we think it's got to be this classroom where we teach these 7 habits of leadership or these 7 steps to being a leader. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, but it's far more living a godly example and doing life and more specific than generic.
So good. The thing that's on my mind is, even as you say, that it's on us for our own leadership development, there is an aspect of our own discipleship where we're not just focused on putting out all the fires around us in our own lives, where we finally poke our head above the ceiling and kind of go, all right, now who needs to be developed more? Who am I investing in? How am I being intentional about the people that are around me that I could see I could be a blessing to and could help raise them up? Even that awareness alone is a huge discipleship piece in us. That it goes from being about us, which most of life is, to, you know what, this isn't about me anymore, and God has called me to now begin to invest in others. I remember that being a major point in my own life with an assistant that I had 10 years ago, still feeling like I'm the young, cool guy, right? And kind of going, wait, I'm now need to be investing in other people. It's not about me anymore. It's not about my attention or it's about me pouring into someone else. And I think there's an awareness that we have to come to even in our own discipleship in that point. And that begins that leadership development.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was interesting. I was driving this morning for about 4.5 hours, and I found a podcast by JD Greear, and he gave 5 elements, and it's actually in his book, Gaining by Losing. And that church, the Summit Church at North Carolina, has intentionally multiplied multiple times more than just getting a bigger campus and being a larger crowd. So they've not just taught and preached multiplication. They've practiced it. And he gave 5 elements, and And if you want to go deeper, you could get his book or go listen to the podcast. But I thought it'd be kind of a good springboard for us, Drew, just to kind of talk about him. Because the first one, I heard you make a statement a couple weeks ago, and I've been using it over and over and over. Because step one is clarity. Mm-hmm. And you said clarity is what?
Kindness.
Exactly. If, people don't know what they don't know. And I know Larry can be dangerous when he thinks, oh, they got to know what I'm thinking. Why wouldn't they understand where I'm headed on this and what I'm doing? Mm-hmm. No, they deserve an explanation. They deserve someone sitting down. And here's the key to clarity. People have got to see what you see. They've got to be able to see it. Mm-hmm. Just like Alaska. I can describe it. When that humpback whale came up out of the water and its spout went off, and honestly, Drew, about 20 feet from the boat, whale watching boat, Shelby and I. Now, can I tell you, I can describe it, and people will be excited. Guess what? You didn't see it. Mm-hmm. And you got to be able to see it. And that's why clarity is so important, that we work at it and we work at it and we work at it on giving a clear explanation so that people can understand as best they can. Some still won't agree. That's okay. But we still need to work at clarity.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Anything you want to add on clarity's kindness? Because I loved it when you said that.
Well, that's a quote from Brene Brown, but and I think it's just so good in the sense that often we don't, and things are clear to us, like you're saying. So we don't think about the fact that somebody else may not understand. But when things go sideways, it's because they don't understand and because we haven't made it clear. And so I think that is a leadership axiom to kind of go, hey, you know what? Let me make sure that, like you're saying, we can see things equally together. This makes sense, and we can just talk through expectations and understanding that we're clear.
Yeah, I like that, because one of the greatest landmines in ministry is unrealistic expectations on either side.
Right.
Either side. Because some people come in, and can I tell you something, pastors, hear me on this. Some people come in, you'll never live up to their expectations of you because they're unrealistic.
Right.
They're absolutely unrealistic. Mm-hmm. I've heard people share things. I'm like, who can do all that?
Yeah.
How in the world? When did we build a culture where that's the expectation, that the pastor has to do everything, be there for every surgery? I've had days at Cornerstone where 4 surgeries were occurring on the same morning. How do you do that? What does that look like? And so unrealistic expectation. I'm going to share a story here. Maybe I shouldn't, but here we go. Because of clarity, I remember when Shelby and I was about to ask her to marry me, and a pastor in my life said, Larry, can I say something to you? I said, absolutely. He said, you need to tell that girl she's marrying a preacher. I said, well, she knows that. He goes, no, you need to tell her, if you say yes, you're saying yes to God's call on my life. And Drew, little did I know that would plant us in the country of Romania. I had no idea. We talk about this all the time. But I was so thankful that pastor said, you need to make that clear to her. She needs to understand that. She deserves that right. Well, in my young buck mind, I'm like, well, hey, I'm going to lead this family and I'm going to head out and she ought to follow. Right. And he said, no, you need to be clear. And I'm so thankful. I don't know how long before, but a couple weeks before, I did ask her to marry me. I sat her down and said, now listen, I'm a preacher. I have no idea where we'll end up. I don't know where God will send us. And I don't know why we always pick Africa.
Right.
But whether that's Africa or somewhere else, if we get married, we both got to be willing to go. Because number one, I don't want to go without you. And number two, I don't want you to have to go unwilling. So we have both got to surrender. So there was clarity. And you know what? when you said clarity is kindness, that's one of the things. And I probably wouldn't have done that if there hadn't have been a godly mentor in my life that
Right.
showed me and said, you need to sit down and have that conversation now, Larry.
Right.
Not, he goes, you've lost it if after you're married, you go, we're married now and I'm a preacher and you got
Right.
it, He said, no, the best you know how, you need to do that. And we had that conversation.
I think that's a great example, and it probably came from knowing examples that didn't have that conversation.
Exactly.
And so that's great advice.
Yeah, the second characteristic is familiarity. And what JD was saying there, I said that like we're buddies. I've never met him, but JD Greear said this about familiarity. You've got to repeat it. You got to say it over and over and over again. And then he made this comment that I love, Drew. That vision and that clarity, it not only needs light. That's where all of our focus, we got to bring it into the light, and we do. But it also needs heat to keep it going. So in other words, not only do you need to shed light on it, you got to keep fanning the flame. You got to keep. It is good, and sometimes I know. I'm sure you feel the same way. Sometimes we go, man, I'm about to say this again, and gosh, they should have this by now. But the reality is they don't. And any educator will tell you about the importance of redundancy at times.
Oh, yeah.
And repeating, because about the time you're understanding it or the staff is understanding it, is when you've really repeated it and repeated it and repeated it. But the staff shouldn't then think, well, everybody out there ought to understand that also. No, there's always that learning curve involved.
Yeah. As soon as you said that about fanning the flame, I thought, and just to add, and not to change what you're saying, but sometimes I'm not sure what we can even do to add the heat. I think that's a God thing. So what we can do is lead people to pray. Absolutely. And pray that he brings the fire and he brings the heat and he brings that spiritual focus, and that is so important. What you're saying is good.
Well, you brought up a great point, because I do think there's spiritual impasses that we can't get through that. Right. We can't push through that. Right. Matter of fact, Drew, I'm convinced you'll agree with me on this. There's been times I've had to say, God, you need to show me. God, I'm struggling here, and you're going to have to give me the strength and the ability. And I was in Zechariah the other day, not by my might nor by my power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. And so, man, it's supernatural. It's out of our hands. That's a great perspective to remember. Are we praying for our people to see what God is saying and get us on his agenda?
Yes. Definitely.
Well, the third one's proximity. And I just like what's said here. People's lives only change when they see it modeled. They've got to see it. Now, I know there's exceptions to, we're not making a fast rule. We're not drawing a line in the sand, because we know there are those individuals that God does great miraculous work, but we can't have the expectation that they're going to pursue something they don't see in us.
Right. No.
You've got to live it. And that's where I made the reference earlier. It's less a class that you teach leadership development. It's more a life that you live. And we've said this multiple times on this podcast. The thing people need to see in you and I as spiritual leaders more than anything else is that we've been with Jesus.
Yes.
We don't have to be the brightest. We don't have to be the smartest. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling better already. But people do need to see that we're seeking Jesus, and the best we know how, we're striving to follow him, obey him, and be obedient to what he has put upon our heart.
No, I love that. It just reminds me of the Acts 4 piece, where the council says, who are these ordinary common men, that have this wisdom? All they can say is, well, they've been with Jesus. That's who he's looking for. beautiful.
Yeah, and isn't it neat, those ordinary guys that all of us remember in our lives that I can think of in my childhood,
Mm-hmm.
in my pastorate, in my ministry, of those individuals. They weren't always up in front of everybody.
No.
They were just steady, regular, ordinary men who had given their hearts and life to Jesus and wanted to make a radical difference for him.
Yes.
And I could name those men in different ministries I've been involved in that just had such an impact on my life.
Mm-hmm.
Good point, man. I love it.
Good.
Well, the fourth word is equity. So we've talked about clarity, familiarity, proximity, and then the next one is equity. And equity is, they got to own it themselves. It's the transfer of leadership. And I like this thought. It's not getting you just to help me. No, I want you to own it.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to take responsibility. You know, equity, I remember in my first pastorate, I was so tickled, and I'm still friends with a couple of these individuals, that I was invited over to their home to lead their child to Christ. And happy to do that, Drew. And one of those young ladies will occasionally send me a text or a direct message, and I love that conversation. But you know, after a couple of years, I started to go, wait a minute, I'm happy with doing this. But if I have to be the one to do it, something's broke. You know, something's broke. I want my parents to be able, and I'm not saying those parents of that girl could have done that, no doubt about it, and they had set the stage. But I did get a conviction, wait a minute, I want people to own this.
Right.
We shouldn't have to call in the hired gun.
No.
To pull off anything.
No.
Oh, we need pastor. You better get here so we can do it. No.
That's right.
No. We are all responsible for the gospel. Every single one of us.
Yes. Man, I love that. That's my testimony. My mom took me to the pastor at 9 years old. And as much as my heart loves that man, I sure wish my mom felt like she could have, in my bedroom, said, hey, let's go to Jesus and and I think same thing. I think she felt she probably could have, but it was that's what she sort of did. But I think that is a beautiful point, that we need to be equipping our people to know how to lead people to Jesus, starting with their families.
And you know, Drew, I'm glad you said what you said, because we're not trying to place blame on any parents. I think the culture was the professionalism of the clergy. That's what they thought, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And you know what? Let's also give them credit. This is my child. I want to make sure this is done right.
That's it. Yep.
You know, and I get it. I get that. But we also believe in the priesthood of the believer, because the Bible teaches it. And we do want to equip them to be able to do that very thing. Matter of fact, the millennials, and the oldest millennials right now are like 42, 43. And I can name one in my church, and he'd look me in the eye. I can guarantee it. Here's what, you ain't leading my boy to Christ.
Right.
I'm doing that.
I'm doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I love it. It's, it's not an either or. It's definitely both and. So equity means you're going to take responsibility. We're not just letting you help us. We're not just delegating it to you as long as you do it the way we want it done. No, we want you to own it, lead it, take responsibility.
Yeah.
That's the only way multiplication can really occur.
That's really good. I'm having this thought real quick. I want to just share this.
Sure.
So we're in a meeting the other day with our church, and letting them ask some questions and things. The elders are up front, and a question was asked, and I thought in my heart, I'm like, okay, I want to answer this, but I pulled back, and I was, I knew exactly the answer that I wanted to be given, but I pulled back. I was like, Jason, why don't you take this one? And I'm praying, Lord, please let Jason answer and Jason answers the most beautiful answer, exactly what was on my heart. And I'm just like wanting to cheer over there, because not that we just have this united front in word alone, There was no coaching done. It was just, this was culture. This is what we had communicated about what we were doing and about why we were doing it, about the Holy Spirit's leading and illumination. And he went directly to where I would have gone. And it's the same thing you're talking about. It's like when he had that equity, when he had that ownership of the material, of the why we were doing what we were doing, it's like, okay, something's happening, and I don't have to be the one to give the answer, and I don't have to be the one to always jump up and praise the Lord that it's now a culture piece and not just an answer to a question.
Wow, I just love that. That what you just said was a gold nugget, bud. It really was the ownership of the why.
Yes.
And that is when that light bulb turned on, and that's when they can run with the why as good and as well as we can, and many times better.
Yep.
Much, much better. I have always pastored people could do it better than me. Certainly different aspects. I mean, we all have our strengths. We all have, our lane to run in. We've talked about the APES, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the teachers, and I missed one, but
Shepherds.
and the shepherds. And we've seen that. Matter of fact, I remember not too long ago, a pastor was talking to me about a retired pastor that joined his church. And he's a little nervous, and I get it. Sometimes pastors are not the easiest people to pastor because they've never been pastored.
Right.
And he looked at me and he said, "What would you do with him?" And I know him close. And I said, "I have never seen a man with a shepherd's heart more than him, stronger than him. If I were you, I'd put him over your pastoral care ministry." And I'd let him run with it. And it wasn't 3-4 months he called me and goes, "Oh, Larry, golly, I've never seen anything like it." He said, "Larry, I can't get to a hospital room or a situation. He's not already there."
Right.
And I said, "Buddy, I'm telling you, he loves doing that." And here's a great point about equity, okay? Get people to especially own what you're not strong in.
Right.
Especially, and bring them up and let them go and not be intimidated, because not a one of us had. The only person that encapsulated all 5 of those, his name is Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And we ain't him.
Nope.
Thankfully, he's in us, and we're redeemed by his righteousness, but we're not going to be able to fulfill all 5 of those like Jesus did.
No.
And to be honest, we're not going to fulfill one of them as well as he did. So get them to own those things and find those individuals. Man, you need the apostle in the room that's always going to, wait a minute, we got to step out on faith here. We need to press forward. We need to, we need to, and then you got the prophet going, "Wait a minute, what's the word of God say on this?"
Yep.
And those things come together, and then the evangelist is always, but are people gonna be won to Jesus by us doing this?
Yes.
But we need those voices at the table as that team that God has put together as we move forward.
Well, and what did the Apostle Paul call those? Gifts.
That's exactly right.
He said Jesus has given gifts to his church in the form of the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, and teacher. And that's exactly what the example you're giving of that story. This former pastor, this retired pastor, became an unbelievable gift to that pastor and to his church.
You're exactly right. Which brings us to the last one, which fits perfect: humility. If we don't remain humble, we'll see those people with those gifts as a threat, not as a gift.
Right.
And I got to confess, Drew, I've done that several times. I've seen people with potential and people with giftedness, and guess what? It made my insecurities rise up.
That's it. Yep.
And, they're going to shine bigger than me. And something's wrong with that statement, isn't it?
Yep. But it's true. I appreciate your heart, Larry, and your honesty and vulnerability, because that's what we do and that's what we think. But we don't always recognize it. There's not always an awareness that, wow, there's something wrong with that statement, and I shouldn't have that. I need to be raising people up even above me. That ought to be my heart. I'll tell this quickly. We,
Please.
one of the roles that I've had in career wise has been as a music producer, produced hundreds of projects, hundreds of records. And one of my friends, an award-winning producer, Paul Mills, I got to work with him early on in my career and in Nashville. And I asked him if he'd just let me tag along. Same sort of concept. Can I just watch what you do? And I watched him lead other musicians in the studio. And I remember thinking, I want to be an amazing producer one day. I really want to grow in this gift. And I remember asking him, what makes a great producer, and how do you do what you do and to be as great as you are? And he goes, it has nothing to do with me. Surround yourself with great people.
Woo.
And I just remember thinking, well, I'm not the greatest bass player, or definitely not the greatest keyboard. I started thinking, I kind of stink at a lot of these things. But if I can bring people who are amazing around me, that lifts the whole project up. And so that's what we're talking about, is we surround ourselves with amazing people. It's that humility, that fifth point, that allows you to go, no, I want him to be better than me. I want them to be able to serve in a way that I can't, and I'm not great at. It'll raise the whole body up. It'd be beautiful.
And in multiplication, you got to be willing to give them away, don't you? You got to hold everything with an open hand.
Yes.
And that's so important. And let's talk humility for a second. Boy, God taught me a great lesson. Now, I'm not saying I learned it completely the first time, but I do remember the first time he really humbled me. I was going to a youth Sunday. I was a student. We both were students at Central Baptist College, a couple of years apart. But anyway, we won't talk decades. But anyhow, I was going to a church. I could name it. I could name the pastor. And Drew, I came across this verse in Ecclesiastes I had never heard anybody preach on. Dead flies in the ointment of the apothecary. Woo! And I came up with a message on dead flies. But buddy, I preached that thing, and can I tell you, it preached, man. It was awesome. Now, I'm probably the only one that would say that, okay? You'd have to get the other witnesses. So I walked to the back, and I got to tell you, I was just way too proud of that message. Yeah. And I looked at brother, his name was Farrell White, and his wife is still alive, Barbara White, lives in Lewin, Mississippi. But anyway, and so I looked at Brother Farrell. I said, what'd you think of that? He goes, son, I think you preached that passage almost as good as I did last week. He had preached on the exact passage the Sunday before. And for years, he'd come up to me and he'd look at me as, that's kind of a humbling moment, wasn't it, Larry? He had the sweetest spirit. Oh, he did. I love that man. Great. Preached a revival for him years later at a church he pastored. And every time I was around him, I enjoyed him. But can I tell you, God has a way of humbling us when we need to be humbled. And that was the day a young preacher boy needed to know, there ain't nothing new under the sun. Mm-hmm. You think you got it figured out. There have been a lot of faithful preachers long before you that have been preaching those passages and faithful to it. And I needed to hear that day. And man, I was very careful from that point forward going, this ain't about you, buddy. And this great message that you found. And I preached that. All kinds of youth. I still have friends from back in those days go, Larry, you still got that outline, Dead Flies?
That's a good book name, Dead Flies.
Yeah, it would. And every single time they ask, I just go through the humility all over again.
Right, yeah.
And let me say this, Drew, that ain't a bad thing.
No, it's not. Yeah. Good thing to rehearse and remember that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah, it is. And so that's humility. You've got to be willing to allow others to take ownership, elevate them. I love what you said. Bring great people around you, because I tell you, what's going to make us or break us in this area is not us. Mm-hmm. Break us, yes, But what's going to accomplish the vision is those around us with those giftings that we empower and equip and we bless and encourage.
Yes. Yep. Love it. The giving away part is not the easiest.
No.
You mentioned that. That's probably a whole nother podcast, but it's something that we have to do. This has been good. Give us the title of the book again.
Yes.
JD's.
JD Greear's book is Gaining by Losing. And in that book, he goes into all 5 of those to a deeper level. I highly recommend it. I've got it, and I think it's a great read. And he covers in it these 5 characteristics, and I'll throw them out again: clarity, familiarity, proximity, equity, and humility.
Good stuff. Larry, thanks for that idea and bringing this conversation to us today and coming back all rested and refreshed and ready to go.
I am, man. Let's do this thing.
Hey, God bless you guys. Thanks for listening to the Healthy Church Podcast. If we can help you, let us know how. info@healthychurchpodcast.com. And we look forward to talking to you next time on the podcast.
For more information and other resources, go to healthychurchpodcast.com.